everybody. Welcome. This is David, and I am in conversation with JoQueta Handy in California. And we just had a lovely half an hour conversation. We've got through all of our tech issues, mainly on my side. And we're going to have a wonderful conversation. So first of all, JoQueta, it's awesome to meet you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm seriously pumped because we just had an awesome chat for half an hour. You've done loads of stuff in your life, and it seems like it's really evolving rapidly now. But you've gone through some pretty distinct stages. So I think a really nice place to start is way back when,
Okay.
because you were talking about life in Oklahoma.
Yes.
Um, what was it like? Yeah, growing up. What were some of the early ideas you had of life and for your own life?
Mm. Um, my grandfather and grandmother were cattle ranchers in Oklahoma, in a very small town of like population 300, called Calvin, Oklahoma, on the South Canadian River, the banks of the South Canadian River. And um, I was an only child, but I was the youngest of 17 grandchildren. So always lots and lots of cousins around. So I never really felt like an only child. And just, I mean, I think it was the most amazing memories as a child on that farm, being in nature. My grandmother is Native American Indian Cherokee, and my grandfather came over on the boat on Ellis Island from Scotland. And the appreciation that we were always taught for Indigenous people, Native American Indians, and the love of the land, honoring the land. And my grandfather used to always say, as we were walking the ranch, which was 2,000 acres, and he'd say, "Baby girl, don't ever sell this land because they're not making any more." And
Mm.
so again, just as a young child, walking beside him, just feeling that honor for the land. And I think one of the greatest things that he taught me was stillness. And as I began working in psychedelics, coming back to that stillness that he taught me as a young child has just been wonderful. The coming home. His favorite thing to do at night was to go and stand on this little knoll outside of their home and just look up at the stars. And he would just stand there by himself looking up. And I would go and stand by him, and he would put his hand on my shoulder. And I would ask him, "Granddad, what are you looking at?" And I was expecting, oh, see that, I'm looking for a shooting star, or see that planet, or see that star formation. And his response was always, "Nothing. I'm looking at nothing." And in that nothing, he was seeing everything. And when he passed away, and I missed that time of just the quiet of standing by him in the nighttime stars. And I found my place in the pasture, on a little knoll, the sun coming down on the grass, the morning grass, with the dew on it. And that was my place of stillness, and the place where I felt so connected, just from the morning light. And that's still, today, um, 55 years later, my anchor place, my place of stillness. So yes, he left that farm in Oklahoma. My grandparents, um, in the past 2 years, in beginning to work with psychedelics, has been a huge, huge piece that has come through in my heart, and really like a revival, a coming home.
Wow. So you've been feeling their presence and having their in a sense, their energy, or just experiencing them in your psychedelic journeys over the last couple of years.
Yes.
Mm. And what about the land that you were just mentioning, or just the land that your family has lived on since then? Where's
Yes.
that been?
Um, so between the seven children, uh, when my grandparents passed away, it was divided up. So I have about 160 acres, and then it's been passed on to the children as my aunts and uncles have passed away. But it is still, for all of us, such a sacred place, such a place of family, um, of coming home. And as a child, I didn't appreciate it. It was hard work, especially in the Oklahoma summers of heat and humidity. And, so as a rebellious 18-year-old, I want to get as far away from that as possible. I want to go to New York. And I did. I did in my early 20s, and it was fabulous. Um, but my heart will always be in that land, that cattle ranch in Oklahoma.
Mm. How often do you go back there at the moment?
I have not been back very much. Our family bought a home in Kansas in 2020 in the Flint Hills, and so that's been our place to kind of commune. But I think about often my one of the last things that my granddad was working on was building a place on the part of the land that is mine, for troubled teens and children. And teens have always, especially in all children, have really been my background. But that's something that's really been coming up a lot for me of, how could I honor what was his vision on that land, on that specific piece of land, and fulfill, what I'm working in right now and the need that I really see for our young adults.
Hmm. Why do you think young adults, teenagers, resonate so much with you? What is it about that age, that period of life, that feels particularly sacred or important to support working through that kind of challenging time of life?
Um, well, for me, I've always worked with children since I started in right out of grad school in the early 90s, working in the Boston public schools. And from that, I transitioned to the New York hospitals, working with critical care infants, the 0 to 3 population, and then children with traumatic brain injury, working with them both inpatient and outpatient. So children have really always surrounded my life, and it wasn't something that I chose. It chose me, and then I couldn't leave it. I started off my background, my master's is in speech language pathology, and I loved at Boston University, got to specialize a lot in voice disorders. And that was, what I was going to move into: laryngectomies, working with tracheostomies, and I kind of specialized myself right out of the field. Because at that time they were looking for someone to start voice clinics in hospitals. So like someone with, much my senior. And so I saw it as a default, started working in the schools and moved to New York and loved hospitals. I loved the energy of the hospitals. So went into the hospitals, and again, children were put before me. And from New York, moved to California in the mid 90s, in 96. And just from the training that I had in New York, it wasn't going to work well to be in the hospital. So started into private practice. And the first person I was introduced to was a child development specialist. And he wanted to prove that there was a sensory base to language development. And I'm like, yes, there is. I can do that. That's no problem. And so again, children chose me. And that developed into a love for autism, working with the autism spectrum. And the children that were the most severe on the spectrum were my greatest teachers. And to this day, they still are my greatest teachers about the gut and the brain, language, learning. So again, a long past with children, 30 years plus. So when the pandemic hit, I had transitioned into in 2018 or 2019 in working primarily more just in a natural integrative practice with my husband, who is a chiropractor, but had a lot of children, not necessarily ASD, but just children, teenagers on my caseload. And I'd always really prided myself in saying, my caseload's medication free or 99% medication free. And when the pandemic hit, that all changed drastically. And I had 12-year-olds. I had a 12-year-old who attempted suicide. I had two 15-year-olds diagnosed with medication resistant depression, which is a fatal diagnosis. And I just saw this significant decline in my caseload. And I'm like, it's time to do something about this. In studying the brain, I began in 2016 to look at the Johns Hopkins research on psychedelics, became a little obsessed with it, did a deep dive into that. And so I'm like, I know I can formulate something around using adaptogens, using functional mushrooms and nootropics, um, and that can help. And so that was really what led me down the path of working more with teenagers and young adults in depression, anxiety. So I work with everybody in that, it's so prevalent right now, even in all the way up to, I have a 91-year-old patient. So a large majority that unfortunately are suffering from depression and anxiety.
Yeah. So you really are integrative. Uh, and it's great to hear how your career's evolved over time, and starting off with more mechanical, like speech and language pathology is more of a mechanical, kind of biomedical aspect, and then getting into the gut and emotions and mental health, and then psychedelics and microdosing and adaptogen. So it's really an integrative way of looking at the human being. Looking back, are you surprised that this is where you are now? That this is the way that your career's gone, but also just that your belief or your understanding of what the human body is, or the human spirit and soul, or do you feel like that was something that you had within you as a sense of potentiality around how we function and how we heal?
That is such a good question. Wow. Um, if you would have asked me, 4 years ago, is this something that you would be doing? Maybe. I've always kind of been on the fringe, not to the. Uh, my husband is, very much stay in the lane, and I'm not. I've always, with autism, I say I've been thrown out of all the best conference rooms in school districts in Orange County, and that's okay. Standing up for being an advocate for those who don't have a voice, our children, and especially our nonverbal autistic children. Um, so I don't think I quite saw myself here. I always say, as I started in this journey, I was doing it for my patients, because I was fine. I was good. They're the ones who needed help. And it absolutely has been the healing that I didn't know that I needed. And 2 years post now, coming into this place, being in this place, it feels so right, so at home, exactly where I was meant to be. So as I look back in, standing on that knoll on a cattle ranch in Oklahoma, looking at nothing but seeing everything, standing beside my grandmother, learning about plants, being taught to honor the land. Nothing's by accident, right? It was all very intentional. It just took me way too many years to come home.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's lovely that we're talking about particularly working with children, and then there's a part of your experience as a child that was imprinted upon you that is now really getting to express itself. And like you were saying, kind of honoring the wisdom of your ancestors, your grandparents in particular, through bringing this kind of more integrative medicine and respect for plants and the land. It's beautiful. I want to just maybe go a little bit deeper into the autism spectrum disorder. And you were saying, you're kicking up a bit of a stink around town. Speaking your truth around autism. And I'm wondering what specifically are the things that seem to be kicking up a fuss for people. What kind of paradigms are you challenging around autism?
um, I My philosophy is every child is a brilliant learner, and that they don't have to be able to speak or write or socialize to be a brilliant learner. Society, we put so many boxes around the child, around all of us, right? But especially around children, you need to fit in this box. And when you don't fit, it gets messy. And at least that's what it's seen in the classroom. So they're labeled, they're medicated so that it's not so messy. But that's not to the child's benefit. And then in that labeling, in that testing, um, you know, their potential is marked. And that's what I saw, that was just so limiting. And then we look at when they turn 18 and say, okay, they're done with school. And now what? And so then the even greater isolation begins. And what I saw was that if we just stand back, that stillness, and watch all children, but especially children with autism, will show us their strengths. Every child is a brilliant learner. So when I would ask the question, show me your strength, they would every single time. And one of my greatest teachers was a 6-year-old boy, Weston. And he, if you looked at him from the outside, you would, well, they did. When I first started working with him, um, at the age of 2, they said that he should be institutionalized and told his parents he's going to be a burden on society. And he had this, very large head. He had the worst nystagmus I'd ever seen, where his eyes just rapidly moved. They were never still. Um, they found later he had a peach-sized water-based tumor on the corpus callosum that affected his balance. So he had to walk with his hands against the wall, his hands and back against the wall. So he would move around the perimeter. He was completely nonverbal. He didn't even say yes or no. He couldn't write. And so a very prominent therapist that I'd actually studied under, her textbook at Boston University had assessed him. And when I went to her, she was in San Diego. And when I went to her and said, I'm going to be working with this child, she said, don't. children like this is what gives a therapist a bad name. He's not going to make any progress. And so thankfully I didn't listen to her, and I took him on as a client. And about 2 years into it, it was not going well. I said, Weston and I started talking to each other through tapping. Literally, he would not let me even get close to him. He would sit in one corner of the treatment room and I would sit in the other. And the only thing I knew was to use a stroke technique that I had learned at Veterans Hospital in Boston, was just to tap rhythm and see if he could mimic my rhythm. And we were working with at the time, I had introduced Weston and his mom to an amazing biochemist who was an energy healer, Dr. Ron Jones, one of the greatest mentors. And we were in Dr. Jones' office, and Weston had this behavior where he would take a book or a magazine and he would rapidly flip through it and then toss it. And sometimes it was right side up, sometimes it was upside down, but he always had a book or magazine in his hand. And so Dr. Jones and I are both just kind of at a loss, and we're watching Weston with this, what was labeled as an autistic behavior. And Dr. Jones said, wouldn't it be interesting if Weston could read? And I'm like, Weston can't read. He's just been thrown out of his second kindergarten for throwing chairs and overturning tables. He doesn't even know the sounds of the alphabet. He can't read. He's like, okay, but wouldn't it be interesting if he could? And we went on about our day. And about 2 weeks later, Weston and I are in the treatment room, and we're both just done with each other. We're in our opposite corners, and Weston's giving me the evil eye. And I heard Dr. Jones' voice, what if Weston could read? And I went over and I picked up a book that he had thrown at me. And it was written on about a second grade level about clouds. And I read a couple of pages and just tore off a notebook piece of paper and wrote a question and then wrote 2 answers. And I held them up. I got as close as Weston would let me get. And I held them up in front of him, held the question up first, and then the 2 answers. And out of the corner of his eye, he swiped at the right answer. And I did it a second time. This time, he pointed to the right answer. And as I went to write down the third question, Weston grabbed the book out of my hand and he started shoving it into my stomach. And he was banging on the floor. And I couldn't read the next page fast enough and get the question written down. And I'm very embarrassed to say, it took me 2 weeks to even believe what I was seeing and to share with his mom. And when I did, I thought she was going to say, you're nuts. She just looked at me and smiled and said, now what? And I'm like, I have no idea. But we began working with Weston in that way. She began teaching him at home. He learned Spanish, her native language, in 2 days. And his grandmother's native language was Japanese. And he learned that in 2 weeks. And all along, Dr. Jones was right. Weston had been reading. And we were just writing it off because we didn't understand the way that Weston read as an autistic stimming behavior. And this was a child that, was, society said, bad, unruly, messy. And he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And when I finally convinced the school district that he was in to test him when he was 9 years old, he tested out at a 12th grade level. And he now, at 28 years old, works with people. We also discovered Weston can communicate telepathically. I could hear him. Again, I thought, that was a moment. And he works with people all over the world now. Still wears his clothes backwards, still won't wear shoes. But he is a brilliant soul. And that completely, no long story here, that completely changed my whole my whole perspective. It changed my career. And so I began finding the brilliant learner in children, built 5 schools around that curriculum for autistic children and their families. And I am so, so grateful for all that they have taught me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your story and Weston's story. Incredibly inspiring and very emotional. I'm kind of welling up, to be honest, hearing about that. And it says a few different things about, I think, the society we live in, the expectations being really rigid and narrow and boxed in about how we are all supposed to kind of perform and fit into this status quo about what it is to be human and success and kind of cultural, socially constructed norms that, yeah, push a lot of people out to the fringes as others. And there's something quite beautiful about, you know, neurodivergence that
Yes.
is having a resurgence and a renaissance to teach us about true humanity and true breadth and depth of humanity, because I honestly feel like our society has imprisoned us to quite a large extent, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, energetically. And we're using psychedelics, amongst other things, to break out of these socially, politically constructed, prison bars, and through kind of relearning and reintegrating more neurodivergence as a way of life and a seeing of life and of other and of acting, then we're just becoming a bit of a better world. And I think the particularly other thing that you're saying as well that I appreciate is this the need for more slowness and uniqueness and seeing the people for who they are, and that might take time, and everyone has their own way of communicating and of expressing themselves. And if we impose on them this, well, everyone's got to write like this and talk like this and read like this and walk and well, no, it's okay to have wear your clothes backwards and not wear shoes, and to that's okay. We're so rigid. Like, I would love to wear a little bit more nail polish every now and again, to be honest, JoQueta, but it's not so socially acceptable. So maybe I only do it, once in a blue moon. So there's so many limits on us that I think exclude so many people into thinking there's something wrong with me, especially now that I've got this diagnosis and I'm, not in a regular school. And, and it's just beautiful to hear that slow approach to really enabling you to see who that person really is without imposing it upon them. So thank you for sharing that way of being, and having 5 schools that you developed to support young people doing that is amazing.
Yes. Thank you.
Final question I've got with autism in particular, and this is coming down to the gut, the microbiome, and then I think we can move into talking about nootropics and adaptogens. And where did your research and your kind of thinking come around the links between autism and the gut and the microbiome? And I don't know too much about it, to be honest. So, like, what research is there out there, and how is the community kind of integrating this new research?
There's so much. I mean, if we look at, I always say autistic children were just, they're here to be our teachers on so many levels. I mean, they were the first ones that showed us that gluten isn't good for us. Um, Dairy can be very inflammatory. Um, our medicines, our vaccines, our environment, they react to all of those things. And so, in looking at, trying to figure autism out, it was discovering the genome and the microbiome, really understanding it. So, um, the small intestine, the third layer of the small intestine, the microbiome is our immune system, it is our second brain. And so that's where autism starts. And because of that gut brain connection, 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, um, because of the disruption to the immune system. Why we see that they're constantly so sensitive to toxins. And So by working from that place, it almost seems like in some cases maybe working backwards. We're like, well, they're not talking, they're acting out. That's the brain. Okay, yes. But where is the foundation piece? The foundation is in the gut. And my first exposure to seeing that was in Borough Park, Brooklyn, in the Hasidic Jewish community. And um, I was what's now called ABA. Any parents, especially needs children that are listening, will know applied behavior analysis. And but I that's how old I am. I was on the very first team when it was Dr. Lovas who developed it out of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, Babe's Hospital. And we were sent into Borough Park to work with these children. And I didn't know, it was my first exposure to autism. And all I knew is that these children were very sick. And I didn't understand why. And at that time, they were being sent these huge bottles of B12 vitamins and Kirkman Lab B12 vitamins. And I'm like, wow, that doesn't make sense to me, but I don't understand why. And so that really forced me into just being able to understand, because I'm like, doing traditional speech and language therapy, this isn't going to work. Their nervous systems, it's not regulated. And so we have to find that regulation piece before they can take on language, right? Storage, retrieval, expression. So I started going to natural medicine, nutrition classes. That led to more, that led to more. And it really became a love. And in my practice, before it was, kind of the trendy thing to do or the right thing to do, I was combining nutrition with language and working from that perspective of helping to regulate the nervous system. And along my journey, met amazing doctors. Another great mentor is Dr. Jeffrey Bradstreet. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but Dr. Bradstreet, just opened my eyes to so many. He was an MD, but used so many alternative medicines. And Dr. Marco Ruggiero, another amazing doctor who actually started in AIDS research, and from that went into cancer, and from that went into autism, and saying, autism patterns cancer so much. And the therapies that he developed around the immune system. Um, so those were very much the mentors that I followed, that I learned from, and that I worked with. And then using all natural medicine, because herbs, stacking herbs to help heal the gut. And from that, seeing changes, seeing that nervous system regulate, and then following that through by not putting them in a box, but looking at all of their talents, their brilliance, and creating then a learning environment around their talents and brilliance. That's really my treatment approach in a nutshell.
I love that we're talking about, the gut, and especially the body, the nervous system as the foundations, I think, of all life, of our life on a cellular level. And that has to be regulated first if we are then going to be doing, other things that are more on a psychological, emotional level. And I think just seeing it as one body, like this is one kind of ecosystem within us. And then when you did your PhD in natural integrative medicine, you went back to school. What were some of the modalities that you were kind of getting taught there, and really getting fascinated in? What kinds of schools or disciplines were involved there?
So integrative medicine, being kind of the premise, everything has a time and a place. So I'm not going to follow just one modality, maybe, Chinese medicine, but looking at all of the modalities. They're here for a reason. right? And again, they serve a time and a place. Like if we look at Western medicine, we are masters at saving lives. We're not so great at quality of life. And looking more toward Eastern medicine, European medicine, where body, mind, and soul, that's more brought into play. Healing, working on the mind, the emotional, the mind, and the body for a complete healing. So that was really where why I chose the path of natural integrative medicine, because I did see that everything has place. Everybody brings a talent to the table, and it creates and we many times need a village for healing. And I think also with my background in autism, traditional medicine many times fails those children. They don't do well with antidepressants, antipsychotics, because of the gut and the condition of the gut. And so, in marrying those two, that was kind of the premise of my PhD. And then I had always worked since 2007. I had worked with quantum biofeedback, and when I first saw it being used by a practitioner, I'm like, oh my gosh, that could be their voice. And it was so many times, things that would have been written off as, oh, that's just autism. The child was in pain. And using quantum biofeedback device, we were able to get to that foundational piece of what was causing pain. And it's like doing, for anyone that, muscle is familiar with muscle testing, kinesiology. This machine will do like thousands of muscle tests within just a couple of minutes. So I can test supplements. I can test them by brand. I can test how much needs to be given, the frequency. I do the same thing with my patients and working with microdosing. So quantum biofeedback became a huge tool for me, not only as finding where are those foundational keys of stress in the body, but also how can we train the body not to have those stressors firing off all the time.
I don't know much about quantum biofeedback. Does it measure almost energy kind of running through meridian lines in the body? Is that
Exactly.
how it does? Okay.
Yes. So it's
Fascinating.
measuring frequency, and the proper way to describe it is it's measuring the stress. Where is the body showing stress? So we're not treating, we're not assessing, we're identifying those stress points in the body. And the body will show you where it's experiencing stress years before it ever moves into a disease state. And so many times, just with the toxicity that's around us on a daily basis, a lot of us aren't in our bodies, and so we're not taking those cues of where those stressors are coming from. We may not have an awareness of them. And so biofeedback is just helping to identify those. And, so many times we go in with a symptom to the doctor. We may say, well, my stomach hurts, or I have migraines. And so a prescription is written for maybe stomach acid, controlling stomach acid, or a migraine medication. And, the migraine may be coming from the gut, from a hormone imbalance. The stomach ache might be coming from a toxic bowel or liver. So when we treat the foundational, or when we train the foundational stressors, we see overall improvement in the body.
Fascinating. Wow. I'm really enjoying learning about this. And I'm sure, like you were saying, as soon as you found out about it, you were like, oh my God, yes, of course, this is great. And you dived into it. And now you're, really specializing a lot as well as in microdosing and supplements. So To move in that direction, can you just do a little definition for me and maybe a few other unlearned folks out there? How would you define nootropic or adaptogen if you were explaining it to somebody?
So I love an adaptogen because it adapts with the body. So, as just as we were talking about stressors within the body, the adaptogen is working with that stress. So, an example is like if I say, oh, you're deficient in B12, okay? B12 has a specific path, a specific point of the way that that's going to be absorbed, that's going to work in the body. But adaptogen can be very broad spectrum. So, in working with mushrooms, mushrooms like each other. So, stacking them creates even a broader spectrum of treatment. So, from just like looking at brilliant blends, we're using lion's mane, cordyceps, and reishi. Yes, those they have specific tasks, but they also, from a broad spectrum, work on improving the supporting the immune system, improving digestion. And then when we combine that with nootropics, which a nootropic is really categorized as that which enhances the brain function, cognition, clarity, focus, and attention. So, a lot of the word biohacker, a really trendy word. Biohackers like nootropics because we can biohack in performance, really. So again, in combining those two, specifically looking at brilliant blends, when we combine adaptogens and nootropics in a specific stack, we can help decrease anxiety, increase REM sleep, which is so important for when the brain, 60% of the brain detoxes. So detoxing that beta amyloid plaque, that neuronal exhaust that builds up over the course of the day. And also, working on mood elevation, focus and attention. I think those are energy, are the primary ways.
Amazing. And what are some of the herbs, nootropic supplements, the actual ingredients that you've found, almost like if you had them in your medicine pouch and you were to carry or handbag and carry them around with you all day long? What are some of the ones that you find to be most adaptive or most beneficial, just day-to-day life?
Well, I think that is almost an endless list. And I learn more every day, in this medicine exploration. I can easily geek out on supplements, herbs, adaptogens. I was at a training this past week, and there was a company there, a newly established company, and I just loved learning. Why'd you stack this together, and why'd you put this together? And so, yeah, it can just be endless. I specifically focused on, again, going back to my background in autism and working with parents of ASD children. It was very important to me to honor them because without a doubt, 100%, they are my greatest teachers. I've had some wonderful mentors along the way, but being on the ground, so to speak, not just in a laboratory formulating things, being hands on with those children on a day-to-day basis, that was the greatest teacher of how is this herb working? How is this adaptogen working? So when I went to formulate Brilliant Blends, I just knew it had to honor them because I was using that knowledge base. I use it on a daily basis with everyone. I constantly say, autistic children have taught us what we know from autism. And what we know from autism applies to everyone. So I used to get really frustrated when I would say, on autism, people go, oh, well, I'm not autistic, or I don't have an autistic child. I'm like, no, you don't have to. There are teachers. So in honoring them, our supplement that's Adapt, I wanted to honor autistic children and anxiety. So we stacked lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi, ashwagandha, maca, and astragalus. So I looked at what are the most researched adaptogens for autistic children, meaning that they could easily digest them, they could easily absorb them, and had a focus around regulating the nervous system. So that was my choice in that stack. And then for our supplement Enrich, it was important for me to honor their parents. And what I found in 2009, when I was working with the Brain Treatment Center doing magnetic resonance therapy and doing a lot of brain scans, we found that 50% of the parents with an autistic child, especially on the severe end of the spectrum, have PTSD. And so, in honoring my parents that have also been great teachers to me, I wanted to do a stack around what are the most research adaptogens for PTSD. And it is very similar to that one of anxiety, but, having energy, treating those adrenals, supporting the adrenals is very important. So in that one, we put a small amount of niacin, rhodiola, and some black pepper. So
Amazing.
just, but
There's
then,
so many different ingredients that you're working with, and I guess I'm using the word ingredients because I'm seeing it a little bit like potions, like almost like how I would imagine a witch or a wizard or a druid or a shaman to make potions, and ultimately I guess we are wanting to make them kind of idiosyncratically for the individual patient. But I love that the lessons that you've received from working with people that have autism. If it helps them, it can help everybody, and by making it work for folks that have autism, it's just automatically going to be the right product, rather than having to think, oh yeah, if everything's, for me as a Jewish guy, if everything's kosher, I haven't got to worry about it. But if I've got to go looking for something that's got the special little sticker on it, then I'll be going from shop to shop. So I think really, if we can have products available that anyone can buy, and they're specifically curated so that they support and really work for the needs of folks that have autism and other realities, then that itself is inclusive. But you're using those teachings from working with their experiences. And I love how in a sense, you took that early work with real people and their families, and then you've made a brilliant blend out of it. And what about, in a sense, I'm always a little bit curious, where does the supplement experience end and the microdosing experience begin? And the role of coaching and the role of kind of, dancing around what's your experience and when did you take that? What time? What did you have for dinner? Kind of thing. And what time did you get to bed? And let's measure the dose and see where we go with that. So how do you understand the roles of supplements, microdosing, and coaching kind of fitting together?
thank you for asking me that question.
Yeah.
Well, going back to Brilliant Blends, I honored autism, but the reason why it was developed was when I, saw that just drastic decline in my caseload, and specifically around anxiety, depression, addiction coming in. Um, and knowing the research behind microdosing, working with psilocybin and how that can help, ketamine, MDMA, and psilocybin was just a medicine that I really resonated with. And so that was what I wanted to bring into the space. Um, it's not legal. And so, how can I work with my microdosing patients, um, but have something that's 100% legal for them? So that was what I wanted to do with the blends, is take it as close to um, the effects around anxiety, depression that psilocybin provides, but in a legal way. I also, in working with microdosing, as it becomes more popular, a gap that I'm seeing is people aren't talking about recovery. You can't microdose every day. And if we, again, go back to autistic children are just here to be our greatest teachers. What did they teach us? They taught us about gut health. A large majority of people have gut issues, digestion, assimilation, absorption. And so that makes recovery, with psilocybin attaching to the A2 serotonin receptor, even more important. Like, for instance, autistic children don't do well with psilocybin because the body is already depleted in serotonin. And so it can create even a greater depletion. So that recovery is absolutely essential. And what are we doing on those recovery days? And that's what I just feel like really isn't being discussed enough. And also looking at, just like anything else, like, one person may do well with one B12 supplement. Somebody else may need a methyl B12 supplement. Somebody else may not absorb it at all. So, in individualizing and understanding that microdosing is intentional and individualized. And I think that is so important as it is being legalized and as we are seeing this amazing rollout, of this medicine, but that we don't move into the space that we did with cannabis of intentional use versus habitual use. So I think that education is extremely important, helping people with recovery, being able to look at what is the right frequency. Should you follow James Fadiman of 2 day, 1 day on, 2 days off? Should you follow Paul Stamets' theory, 4 days on, 3 days off? With this strain, some strains are stronger than others. Do you need 100 milligrams versus 150 milligrams? So looking at, I've noticed my patients with addiction tend to need more. What are the medications that you're taking? All of that comes into play. So it's not, we say the pill with the skill. It's not just as simple as popping a pill or eating a mushroom, for it to really have the healing power that plant is meant to have.
Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like it's a challenge for us to hold ourselves accountable, to set those intentions and to stay attuned to those intentions and what we're noticing. And I definitely can just speak personally, to be honest, JoQueta. My microdosing has been very powerful, but I have not been able to give it the time it deserves. I'm kind of just, rushing through it and going, oh, okay, quick, yep, I got that, because my life's a little bit bonkers. But I've still found it's really helped me just stay sane because, I'm moving to Israel in 1 week.
Yes.
My life's been upside down the last 6 months, and that's just happens to be when probably the last 12 months I've been microdosing CBD and then other capsules, who knows what's inside them, just to say on air. And they've really helped that, and I wish I would have had more time to have tuned into them, to my body, to my energy, but I've really found, gosh, they've helped me get through a very, very destabilizing part of my life and be able to be more present for my family, and to be able to just regulate my nervous system more than without them. I'm 100% sure of that. So yeah, that's just my personal experience. I'm fascinated to do more of this tweaking and exploring within and understanding, the little changes here and there with my nutrition, with my sleep, doing more exercise, changing my yoga, I'm just not quite ready to do that yet in this stage of my life. But I feel like what we are all being invited to do is accept an invitation from our body to give it attention, to become more embodied. So my experience of the last 12 months is I'm a lot more embodied than I used to be. So I'm a little bit more emotional and sensitive than I used to be. I'm a bit more aware of other people's emotional needs as well. Um, and yeah, I just feel a bit more spiritually, energetically attuned as well. Just really feeling more awe and gratitude for life. Um, and yeah, so I'm just very grateful for the experiences of the last year, but really looking forward to doing more. And particularly, I think coaching would have been really helpful looking back. So I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned the quantum biofeedback. Is that something that you would work with a client that's doing the microdosing as part of coaching, just to feel into kind of, yeah, how their body's responding and kind of have that iterative kind of communication with them on multiple levels?
Absolutely. In my practice, that's where we start. We start with a quantum biofeedback evaluation or scan. And just as I was saying, it's like doing muscle testing. So, muscle testing, what would be the best strain? There's varied amounts, and what would be the best dosing for them, and looking at their starting with looking at their overall health, because again, I don't believe everybody is healthy enough to microdose. And so, starting from that place and starting from that place of healing, um, what could we do to support better gut health? And just like in autism, when we impact the gut, we impact the emotional piece. So, anxiety goes down, irritability, better sleep, and then you're only going to get more from doing microdosing, because you're going to be more, just as you said, embodied in your body. Um, and that's where, real change, just as you've seen in this incredibly busy time in your life, but being able to stay present, focused.
Lovely. And there's another thing that I saw that you do, which is more working with people for a couple of days at a time. And to me, that just seems like a really beautiful way of working with people, that you can do these consultations, you can have appointments, you can maybe do some coaching sessions. What have you found is the delta, the difference experientially, and maybe outcome as well, of working with people in real life and, taking a couple of days, 2, 3, 4 days to work with them and also trying different modalities. And so maybe just if we could clarify that piece first, what have you found? And then we can then start to talk about what do you do during these couple days working with people? What is the experience that they have?
Um, I think being able to really identify, bring in the spiritual path. And that doesn't mean religion, the spiritual. I call it um, coming home to self, know thyself, right? So, whatever you identify with, of, the people in saying you can only love others as much as you love yourself, you need to love yourself first. That is so true. And I think we, at least the path that this has led me down, the healing I didn't know I needed, was was coming home. I had just gotten so separated from the I am. And when that happens, then we're looking externally for happiness, right? Oh, if I have a bigger house, then I'll be happy. If I have more money, I'll be happy. If I have this job. And while all of those things are wonderful, that's not fulfillment. That's not what our soul longs for. And so my goal in working in this area, started out just to see if I could reduce anxiety, depression, addiction. But what has resulted is a revival in coming home, in know thyself, in knowing, and that happening personally, and then being able to share that with my patients. And what does that lend us? Well, that's true freedom. And so, when we ask, what do we truly want? Hey, we want freedom, freedom of self. And I think that in, one by one, working in that area, that awakening, and that person sharing with the next person, that frazzled mom, able to come into presence, come into awakening, and be the model for her children, and the course that sets for those children, the coworker, able to share, um, in his workplace, just by example, not having to say anything, just by example. It's contagious. And I think that's how we change the world.
Yeah, by helping each other to connect with their authentic self and to embody and manifest that, to inspire, and yeah, just to be a little bit more content within. There's some experiences that I think we've had at times in our life that resonate with spirituality, with meaning, with this feels right. But how to hang on to that? Do we hang on to that? Do we grasp that feeling? And particularly, I'm thinking about like when we go on retreats and have this amazing time in this, artificial life, and then we go back to our normal life with wife and kids or the work and whatever it might be. How do we? And then also just thinking about psychedelic trips. Again, is it artificial or what is reality? What is? I think that's another part of this. So I think the reassigning of reality, of expectations, becomes a really significant challenge. And the question that arises is, what is real? I feel like what values guide how I define reality and the goals of my life. And sometimes the goals and the meaning of our lives can just melt away. And we talk quite a lot around ontological shock and the rupturing of our kind of default mode network, or of our, just normal reality. And so what replaces that? And it's that embodiment. It's that just simply kind of being with that experiencing of energy and of self. And it comes and goes at times. And I think it's good not to grasp too much. But when we can share that with other people and just show up a bit more, knowing we're being a bit more authentic and present for people, it's a bit of a relief to feel ourselves showing up more authentically, like I think we do now, you and me talking. It's kind of a bit of a relief that we can reveal those parts of ourselves. And I'm just speaking of parts, you just did some amazing parts work with 5MEO and doing IFS work. So I would love to hear a bit more about that and what that reveals. What parts of us do we start to get a bit more familiar with, and to be able to kind of sit with those aspects of self. So could you just tell folks that what you were lucky enough to just experience? I think it was in Oakland, you were saying.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. Love to share that. I think it's one of the, I've learned a lot of therapy programs over the past 30 years. I think it's definitely one of the top 5 things I've ever learned, for sure, in psychedelics. The most transformative thing I've learned so far. Um, and it goes right in with what you were talking about of, after the retreat, after the psychedelic experience, uh, how do we harness that? And I think sometimes retreats, I refer to them like being in rehab. Rehab's the easy part. It's when you come home and to be in your environment. And so I think, for sure, integration, coaching. I can't stress that enough, or I kind of have a hard time with the word coach. I think the guide, is so important. So encouraging, if people don't have that, it's so important. And especially as we're going to see more and more retreats developed in Oregon and in Colorado right now. Very important to have that support. With that said, when so many times in meditation, just using that as one example, there's kind of a shaming around it, right? You need to be quiet. You need to quiet your brain. You have to have stillness. If you can't follow this guided meditation, and so many times I think we fail, right? Or we feel like we failed. Why can't I get my brain to be quiet? Why can't I master this? Why can't I have a strong meditation practice? Well, what I've been working with is just like in IFS, internal family systems. What they recognize are the parts. And just like we have an external family system, we may have the alcoholic uncle, or might label the crazy aunt or something like that. I think I get labeled that way in our family, so totally embracing that. Um, Everybody serves a part, right? Whether it feels dysfunctional or not, deviant, everybody in that family serves a part. And in our internal family, every part serves a purpose. So many times we're trying to overcome that negative voice, that constant, my brain just won't shut off. If only I could make my brain quiet, then I could meditate. So, just like the saying, what we resist will persist, that is true in our parts. And again, when we recognize that there is a very specific purpose, just speaking personally with some things that in the therapy that I got to go through this past week is seeing three very specific parts. Um, Usually they come from childhood. And so many times, as Dr. Schwartz talks about, who developed IFS, when we talk to those parts, they give us the information that we need. So in realizing that I have a narrator that is very upfront and is constantly, well, what about this? Well, what about that? And why is that narrator talking? Well, it's talking because of fear. And that fear came from an experience as a 6-year-old child. And and what we do in IFS is to locate that in the body. And you're walking through a distancing, creating distance between that part. And when we can create distance, that reduces the intensity. And then when we can anchor it in our body, that brings meaning to it, right? It's not as abstract. But the bottom line is what's being taught, instead of scolding, shaming, ignoring, what happened if we just loved that part of that 6-year-old girl who has had so much fear for almost 50 years? And what if we thanked that part for all of the work that it has done over these 50 years, the place that it has held? And in doing that, we're able to work with, recognize, manage, and really that's all our parts want, right? Just like that, alcoholic uncle. He's in a lot of pain, right? And maybe he just wants to be noticed. Maybe he just wants to be loved instead of being pushed outside of the family. Maybe he just needs an arm around his shoulder and a big hug. Our parts, our internal parts, are no different. And then in working with 5-MeO, that was actually the first psychedelic that I worked with. I didn't know at the time that you weren't supposed to start with that one, and I was quite shocked when I went through the third wave coaching certification that everybody was like, what? I'm like, oh, you guys didn't start with this one? Okay, sorry. But it was an amazing experience for me of moving from a cerebral knowledge of unconditional love to a visceral knowledge of that anchor being, you can never take this away from me. I know that I know that I know. And so the newest thing that I've been working with, like microdosing, but even going lower than microdosing, low dose psychedelics can provide as much as, and sometimes even more, of a transformative experience than when we do macrodosing. And so the greatest thing that I learned is, yes, retreats are wonderful, but we can have the retreat in our living room, right? In using low dose psychedelics and working, of course, definitely working with the the appropriate guide. And the end result being knowing, I love what Paul Austin says, when he was taking us through certification, he called it Dumbo's feather. Dumbo realized that he didn't need his feather to fly. That's the end game. That's the bottom line. In all of this work that we're doing, that's where the transformation and freedom is, to realize that this medicine is in all of us. Maybe we're just using psychedelics to open that door to reveal it and show us the path how to anchor it. But this medicine is in all of us and always was. And so, if we can use these different pathways, these different approaches to lead us back home, then wow, bravo.
Amazing. Thank you for everything that you've shared. We've been talking for a long time, and I don't want to have to um, say toodaloo, but I'm just loving how, through hearing your story, you've gone through different phases of life. And there's always been a really strong, sincere quest for truth, and it's found so many different things like, wow, this is it, or this is part of it, and that's continuing to evolve. And what you were just saying, JoQueta, around finding the medicine opens a doorway, but the point is not to keep taking the medicine to keep the door open. It's just to feel that door is always open within us. And I'm very interested in spiritual practices as well, and I feel like ultimately that's what spiritual teachings are there for. That's what family and tribal containers are there for. Just feeling the sense of sacredness naturally through being a human being, not needing to be other than ourself. So I just want to honor your path and the path of your ancestors that have enabled you to bring their wisdom into life. And I know you've got 5 kids as well that you have birthed, and probably in some senses experimented on, in a sense, or put your teachings and wisdom into practice, being a mum and caring for them and helping them to heal. So is there anything else that we didn't get to talk about yet that you wanted to share?
I think we covered it all. It was such an exciting conversation. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
I've really loved it. I really have it. Honestly makes I'm starting to think about who I am. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I love being a social worker, but I've got a sense I'm more than that. That there's other parts of me that need some more expression, and just moving away from these titles as well of doctors and nurses and social workers and coaches. And yeah, we're human beings, and we're all going home, like you said. So for folks that are listening, that also are like really interested and inspired, can you tell them, where to find you and where they might get more information about some of the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. Our practice in Newport Beach is drhandy.com. If you want to look at what we do, find out more information about biofeedback, and that's where we work with clients on a in-person basis. Quantum biofeedback can also be done through telemedicine and remotely. So I have patients all over the world, some that I've never met. The blends that I mentioned, Adapt and Enrich, that company is Brilliant Blends, and the website is My Brilliant Blends. And you can see our story on there. You can order product, have questions answered. We also have an events website that's going to be evolving a lot from what it is right now, based on this training that I just went through this past week. But please go visit it and sign up for the newsletter so that you can be part of the new evolution. But that's called Three Co's Events, and the three Co's just mean connection, community, and co-elevation. So it's just the number 3 COS events.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Brilliant. I'm so happy we squeezed in this conversation before I begin my new life. And life is always beginning anew. Like, just the cells in our body are constantly being replaced, and life is eternal. It's great to have shared it with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I just so appreciate you carving out this time in your very, very busy last week and the journey that you're on. Thank you.
My pleasure. And I'd love to experience some of the brilliant blends that you have, and also some of that quantum biofeedback. I think that'd be
Absolutely
fascinating. I'd love to see what my body is saying.
I would love to do a scan for you. That would be
Oh my
great.
gosh. Okay, let's keep talking. All right, so this was a pleasure. I'm really grateful for the time, JoQueta, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time. God bless, folks.